good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this week's edition of the Japan America Society of Georgia's webinar Executive Dialogue Series. My name is Yoshi Domoto. I'm the Executive Director of the Japan America Society of Georgia. And I'm so thrilled to be on today to present a very important topic with some friends from the Census Bureau, the impact of Census 2020 on the US-Japan communities, not only here in Georgia, but throughout the whole country. Today we have special guests, panelists from the Census Bureau, Mr. Luke Wen, and also Ms. Tina Wen. And then from our own Japan American Society of Georgia's Public Affairs Committee, the chair of the committee, Mr. Charles Coney. Hello, everyone. Well, thank you again for joining us. So today we'll get started with a brief presentation from the Census Bureau to talk about some data, some very interesting and eye-popping data about the Japanese community here in Georgia and also across the US, and then ways we can all be part of the movement to be counted, and then also talking about how it impacts the Japanese community, especially in communities outside of Metro Atlanta where a lot of Japanese manufacturing companies are. So without further ado, we would like to get started. First off, we'd like to introduce Mr. Luke Wen. Luke, as we get your presentation up and running, would you like to introduce yourself very briefly?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Yoshi, for the introduction. My name is Luke Wen. I am a data dissemination specialist from the US Census Bureau. I'm kind of like the ISI generation, the first generation of Vietnamese American who I immigrated to the United States back in the early 90s, 1992 to be exact, in upstate New York, and I moved down here in 2008. In Atlanta to work for the Census Bureau. So it's been more than 12 years working for the Census Bureau now. So part of my job is to engage with the public across the wide range of the public. We're talking about government to businesses, to universities, to community organizations, to engage with them and train them on the use and this access census data for the use of this for business planning, for research, or for many applications, even marketing and so on and so forth. And today, with my short presentation, I'd like to go through a couple of census data about the Japanese American community. Next. And as we know, May is Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and the Census Bureau every year produces statistics on Asian population in the United States. And you can see on the infographic on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that there were more than 1.5 million Japanese in the United States, among more than 22.6 million Asian alone or in combination. I will go through explaining to you that concept in a bit. Next. All right, so in general, the US population is the growth is kind of slowing down. And if you can see, since the last census, the US general population grew at 9.7%. Next. But if you break down the general population and look at among the other races, and you see that the white population is slowing down at 5.7%. The black population actually grew at 15%. The Hispanic population at 43%. But look at the Asian population in the United States, grow faster than the other race group between 2020 2010 at 46%. Now, when we break down this 46%, we can see where the Japanese population growth stands on it. The US Census Bureau also conducts population estimates and projections every year. And we are estimated by the year 2060 that will be about 40 million Asian in the United States. Next. Now, I want to take you back a little bit to the history and historical time when the Census Bureau first started collecting data on Asia. Now, the first census took place in 1790, but not until 1860, the first time the US Census Bureau began to collect data on Asia. And if you look 2 decades after that, not until 1890, and then you can see the first time that we tabulated the response for Japanese by the 1890. And then for folks that are working with data and dealing with data, sometimes you who are concerned about the Asian American and Pacific Islander, and the frequently used term is API or API. This infographic is here. It's just to remind you that that term API, it can be used to refer to anybody, Asian and Hawaiian Pacific Islander up until 2000 census. Now after that, the groups were divided into 2 separate racial categories, meaning Asian and then native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander. Just a note. Next. All right. So if we take a look at the Japanese population over the past census, for example, we compare 2000 to 2010 census, for example. If we take the Japanese alone category, why Japanese alone? We are looking at all those people, respondents, who check only Asian, or they write down Japanese or check the Japanese box on the census form. And we're going to show the form in a minute. And then if the respondent just check that, and then they will be counted as Japanese alone. Now, the Census Bureau also allows the respondents to check more than one race on the census form. So that for those folks who check Japan or Asian, and then they add whether another race, whether it's black or white, and so on and so forth. And another, we have the number on the second column. And then the total population would be the combination of Japanese alone and Japanese with one or more races combined, and you get the total population. Now, if you look at this graphic, and you can see that the number of respondents responded Japanese alone actually reduced as we have lesser people checked Japanese alone on the census. Now, the census didn't give us a reason, but we can speculate that either we have more Japanese checking multiracial category, or maybe that we have lesser Japanese or people who identify as Japanese alone in the United States at the 2010 census. All right. But this is important. Let's go back a little bit, because this is important, especially among the Japanese population, because I want to emphasize this. The next time, if you want to mention about, say, the size of the Japanese population in the United States, in Georgia, it's important that we address this, especially among Japanese. With the Vietnamese and Koreans, it's pretty close because they are very much checking Vietnamese or Korean alone, but the Japanese multiracial category is very high. And you can see on the second column that it grew by 55.9% in the last census. So overall, the Japanese grew at only 13.5%. Now, remember, the total growth rate of Asian population grew at 46%, as earlier graph showed. But the Japanese population grew at 13%. It's very small proportion compared to other Asian races. Next. All right. And so what we learned from it, we learned that the Japanese experienced the slowest growth among all the Asian racial groups at 14% or 13.5%, as the previous graph showed. But among all the Asian groups, here's is important. The Japanese reported the highest proportion of multiple races among the Asian people at 41%. And then the graph on the right-hand side there shows that the majority of the Japanese population still reside in the West. But in overall, if you look at the red boxes, you can see there are more and more Asian moving into the South. And when we're talking about the southern United States, we're talking about somewhere below the Ohio River, up in Delaware, Washington, D.C., all the way to Texas. And that's considered the South. And then there's a trend that more Asian population moving into the South next. And so talking about the South, I did up some more data and trying to look at the growth of Japanese population in the state of Georgia. And I chose the year 1900 because remember, if we remember the first slide, when the first time the U.S. tabulated the Japanese category was the 1890 census. So up to 1900, we have statistics on Japanese in America. And here in Georgia, actually, they recorded one person who reported Japanese in the 1900 census. Look forward, at this point, if you look at the 2018 American Community Survey estimate, we have about more than 9,000 Japanese alone, okay, just Japanese alone, in the state of Georgia. But what's significant about this graph is that in between 1960 and 70s, and you see there's a jump of Japanese population in the state, and this happens across the country as well. That the watershed moment was the enactment of the 1965 Immigration Act that removed quotas of immigrants from other countries to the United States. Today, after that 1965 Immigration Reform Act and Nationality Act, we can see that the Japanese immigrant population jumped tremendously and significantly in the state of Georgia up to this point. All right, and then I begin to break down further and just to look at some of the major counties in the state of Georgia with the larger Japanese population. And of course, looking at the four major metropolitan counties, Cobb, Fulton, DeKalb, and Gwinnett. And Fayette, there is some significant Japanese population in Fayette County too, but it's kind of at the fringe of the metropolitan Atlanta area. But at the core of it are these four counties. And look at this, the Japanese, and I do apologize for the typo on the title there. 2010 Japanese alone, the first column, and you see and then the second column, it shows the 2010 Japanese in combination. And you can see that a significant increase if we take a look at the Japanese in combination number. And similarly, up to 2018, you can see that we reported 9,000, more than 9,000 people reported Japanese alone. But look at the Japanese in combination is almost double. And this is the number that I usually tell people to use if they want to market or to want to present a more accurate picture of what the Japanese community is like in the state of Georgia. 20,000, close to 20,000 respondents of people identifies themselves as Japanese or Japanese American or Japanese with multiracial heritage. Next. So before I move on to talking about 2020 census, I just want to show you these major surveys conducted by the Census Bureau where the respondent can check Japanese onto the census form. On the left, which is the American Community Survey conducted every year, sample survey, you have an opportunity to check, to identify Japanese, and then you can check more than one races on this form. And in the middle is a 2020 census form, and on the right-hand side, 2020 census form. And then Tina will talk more about this. Next. All right. As I say, I'm a data dissemination specialist. Any of you who are interested in accessing the data and understand more about some other data, please give me a call and contact me or contact Yoshi with the Japan American Society, and we can conduct another training for you. And thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Luke. And that was very, very interesting data. And it's interesting how the Japanese population in the U.S. started from one person in 1900, and now it's now one of the largest populations from the Asian community. So we really appreciate you sharing that. And certainly, I think if we do a great job of making sure that all of our members of our community gets counted, I think that number will go even further up. So, but before we go into, I guess, how we can do that with the 2020 census, I would like to ask Ms. Tina Nguyen to introduce herself very quickly, and then we'll go into how we can be part of the 2020 census. Tina?
Great, thank you, Yoshi, and everyone. My name is Tina Nguyen. I am a partnership specialist at the U.S. Census. My job is primarily to build partners with the community around Georgia and promote and engage the community to respond to the 2020 census. And so it's great to be partner with Japan American Society to promote the importance of the census with the Japanese community and making sure that everyone is counted, right? So next slide, please. Let's talk about the 2020 census. So Luke talked a lot about data, and we have this information based on the 2010 census. Now 2020 is where everything starts what's called a baseline for the community. And so the 2020 census started back in 1790. Next slide, please. And it's based by our Constitution. So we are mandated to do the census every 10 years. And next slide. Based on that information that we receive from the states, one, we use that for representation really from the federal to the state and then the local level. But it also determine the federal funding for important programs for our community. But one of the things that we want to also convey, especially, Yoshi as well as Charles, that the census data are used in many ways, from grant writing, of course, to business planning also too. And so 2020 census is very important that we get an accurate count so that we can allocate these resources to the community accurately. All right, next slide. So these are some of the programs that is impacted by census data, and these are the federal programs. You talk about Section 8 housing assistance, for example, to SNAP, even of course, public safety, and we know with COVID-19, the impact of census data is very important for the community to plan emergency resources, especially to the community. Next slide. One of the things that we want to let everyone know is that the Census Bureau take protecting your information very seriously. So under Title 13, we will not share your information with anyone. Your individual information is kept safe. We don't ask for your social security number. So if anyone call and say they're from the census and ask for your full social security number, that's not us, all right? One of the things that we want to also let you know is that 2020 census here, but Luke did mention the census, a survey that we send out to select household also too. And so Yoshi, if you can go back to the previous slide, if you want to make sure that you are actually in a survey, you can go to the link below, Are You Into Survey, and check to see how, if you and your household is selected to respond to the survey, all right? And one of the things that we want to let everyone know is that the Census Bureau employees are sworn to protect individual respondent information for the rest of our life, really. And so if Luke or myself break that law, we have a penalty of about up to 5 years imprisonment. and I'll fine up $250,000. So I can tell you right now, I don't have that money, and looks, I'm pretty sure don't have also too. Next slide. So let's talk about how we can respond so that we can make sure that the Japanese community get an accurate count. There are three ways for you to fill out the census. The first one, of course, is a paper form. You should receive a paper form in the mail if you have not responded yet in April. And that form is sent to a household pretty much address. Now, if you lost it, it's misplaced somewhere, you can also call our phone number. We have one, of course, for the English number, and then one for Japanese speakers. So if you call the Japanese line, the person who pick up would be speaking to you in Japanese. So they'll be like, moshi moshi, right? And so that's something that, you know, language barrier will not, won't be a barrier for the Japanese community. Another way, of course, very convenient, is go online to my2020census.gov. All right, next slide. So let's go back to 2020 census, how we can respond via paper. If you receive this, you can write out and then send the information back to the census. Like I say, if you lost this form, you can call the phone number. Next slide. And these are the language support number for the Japanese. If there are other languages for your neighbor or someone else that you know speak other languages, these are the different numbers that we have for non-English language support. All right, next slide, please. And for the non-English language support, so these are the 12 languages, and we know Japanese is included. And so when we tabulate a website, it can translate the website into those 12 non-English languages, including Japanese. That being said, we know there are other languages that the community speak also too. And so next, and let me see. And these are the different languages that were made and created for a video guide for the community. So if they speak, for example, Swahili, there is a video guide available that show them step-by-step instruction how to fill out the census online in Swahili, for example. Right, next. So let's talk about the my2020census.gov. So when you go online, this will automatically come as in English, but if you want to translate into Japanese, next, Yoshi, you can go to the English one, change it to Japanese, or just click on Nihongo right there, right? So then it will tabulate into the website into Japanese language. And of course, at the bottom, next, is a YouTube link, and that one is for you to kind of click begin, and then it will take you step-by-step process. Next, at the bottom of the screen, it will show you the YouTube video, and so you can click on the link to the YouTube video, and it will show you kind of a step-by-step instruction how to fill out the census in Japanese. So everyone can, you know, if you need that step-by-step instruction, you can visit that YouTube link later. All right, next. So let's talk about the 2020 Census Self-Response Map. This is actually a great tool, and I'm very excited about this in terms of showing us where is the national self-response rate is. So as of 23rd of June, 61.7% of the household across the United States have responded. So that's great, that's amazing, but we're missing about 38% of households that have not responded, right? And so we wanna make sure that, you know, we get 100% accurate count so that we get the representation and fairly and fair distribution of resources. So if you talk about Georgia on the left side, Georgia currently right now, the state as a whole, the household has responded at 57.6%. So we're still missing about 42% of the community that have not responded yet of the household. If you talk about, Luke said, in Cobb, DeKalb, Fulton, Gwinnett County, where it's a large Japanese community reside there. If you look at Cobb County, it's great. It's actually performing higher than the national average at 64.5%. But if you look at, let's say, Fulton County at 57.2%, that's below the national participation rate. So we want to make sure that these county and our community that live in this county, if you have not responded yet, respond so that we can increase this participation rate and then showcase and making sure that we're counted. I want to share with you also to the city's participation rate, and why I chose the city was because Luke pretty much mentioned that these are the top 4 cities where there are a lot of Japanese reside in those cities. So for the city of Atlanta, we see a participation at 53% response rate. And so we're missing still 47% of the households that have not responded. So we want to make sure that our community know the importance of the census and participate so that we can increase that response rate for the 2020 census. Now, of course, this response rate map is updated pretty much daily. So you can go to the 2020census.gov response rate, the link below there, to kind of check on the response rate in your geography daily, if you like, to see the progress of it. And if you want to kind of learn how to navigate the response rate map, look as a data dissemination specialist, he can also help you out and kind of showcase and walk you through the step of navigating the response rate map. All right, next please. One thing I want to let everyone know is this: census is still going. The last day that for us to self-respond is October 31st, right? That's the absolute last day. And after that day is over, whatever number we're stuck with is for the next 10 years. So if the Japanese community, only let's say half of the community responds, so Luke said about 20,000 for Georgia, let's say we only have 10,000, that's going to be the number for community for the next 10 years. And we don't want that, right? And so we want to make sure that we fill out the census before that deadline hit if you have not responded already. And I want to stress also to this very important date of August 11th. Now, because of COVID-19, our operation timeline shifted a bit and changed to accommodate the current environment that we're in. And so August 11th is when we start what's called a non-response follow-up operation. And that's when, if you have not responded, we're gonna go knocking on your door around that time and say, hi, we're from the census. Let's talk about census. Can you fill out this form, right? And so the census taker will come and knocking on your door if you have not responded. And one of the things that we want to, do is protect ourselves as well as our community, right? And so if you respond before this time, then we know that your household have responded, and we won't send the census taker there. And so you won't have, to open the door and putting yourself at risk. Right? And so this is something that we want to make sure that our community is aware of and know. That being said, this date is not definite. We may change it based on the environment. It may be earlier a little bit, or it may be pushed back a little bit later, depending on, of course, the recommendation of the federal as well as state and local official. Okay, next, please. One thing that I would like to ask everyone is to challenge your network. One of the things that we can do at home, if we're working at home or staying at home, is share the challenge, right? Promote the census virtually through your social media network, even calling your friend, texting your friend within your network. Next, please. All right, and this is look at my information. So any questions that you have and comment afterward, you can contact me or Luke, or contact Yoshi, and he will forward the questions or anything later on. All right, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tina. We really appreciate letting us know how you can be part of the census and how easy it is to take the census, right? You can do it in any language, basically, whether it's English, Japanese, or even Swahili. And you can do it online. You can do it on your phone. You can certainly do it the old-fashioned way over the regular USPS mail. And then certainly, if you want to talk to someone in your own language, I think there's a lot of phone calls or a lot of phone numbers you can use, even a specific phone number for Japanese. So, but without further ado, we would like to kind of continue on and want to introduce Mr. Charles Coney. So as many of our members know, Charles has been a longtime member of the Japan America Society, and he's been involved with both the government sector and the private sector. But Charles, as we get your presentation up, will you reintroduce yourself a little bit to our network and with your enthusiastic self, and kind of let us know why the census is so important. Charles?
Thank you, Yoshi, and good afternoon to everyone. We're so glad that you've taken the time to hear what we have to say. My experiences have been trying to make sure that I get counted for the benefit of myself, my country, and my community. I've had the pleasure of working in the government side as well as the private sector side, and I see and know wholeheartedly the impacts of what these numbers mean. And unfortunately, the fact that we must live with them for 10 years. What even more reason to get it right. So thank you, Tina and Luke, for your earlier statements. Whenever you're ready, Yoshi, I'm ready. I'm going to mention some creative elements today, but I want you to understand that the goal of our census is to get everyone counted wherever they are. You saw the early statistics of the 67 participation, et cetera. I say that we need to be trying to go toward 100. We need everyone counted because we already know who everyone is. That's the benefit of this year being digital. We need to market this on a one-to-one basis, have the conversations continuously about the census. It's stressed to everyone what the importance is. I'm just going to highlight some items that I found in my particular experiences that have worked. Partner with the complete Census Complete Count committees. This is an organizational structure that has been set up in every one of our communities. All the cities that were listed, the counties that were listed, they have a government-sponsored structure already in place, which lends itself to the communities. In fact, one of the arms, one of the subcommittees is a community-based collaboration so that it can filter information down as well as provide necessary resources, whether those resources be campaigns with materials of handout, pencils, etc., marketing materials, but bigger than that, support so we can have on-site census takers who can take that information for us. So I highly encourage you to do a little bit more research, find your complete count committees, partner with them so that you're not reinventing the wheel. I also say, let's make it fun. If you notice, I've taken what is in the lower right-hand corner, the government census, but I'm highlighting in the upper left corner, the color, the beauty, so that it's not as government branded, but it feels like a part of our community. And these are just some logos that I found that other communities are using. You can do a mosaic or a collage, get the young people involved. Let's make it fun. Even from the point of adding this to certain holidays that are coming up. Inside of our Asian community, Malaysia is celebrating Georgetown Heritage on July the 7th. Incorporate census in there, have some materials at the festivals. On July the 24th, our Japanese community is celebrating Sports Day. August the 12th, Mother's Day for Thailand. Also, August the 10th is Mountain Day for our Japanese community. Each of these bring people together. And that's an excellent way to have the conversations about the census and to promote the work. We also need to solicit ambassadors and champions. We need people who can give a personal endorsement to the census and say, this is what it meant to me. We're very fortunate we've come from, according to the numbers, 1 to a high number, but that's because people had the conversation and say that it's okay to do the census. There's nothing wrong with it. Don't be fearful of your information being taken away from you or abused. Personal endorsements. Choose influential leaders or gatekeepers in our community. And for example, in our Japanese community, there's high respect for the elders. So let's get the elders involved to speak to this so that our younger persons or everyone else understands what that can mean for us. We want to maximize the technology. This is a day and time where we have more smartphones, iPhones, iPads, laptops, Androids, computers, even Wi-Fi enabled hotspots. Use all of that technology. Earlier in the picture that you saw from our colleague Tina, she showed how the census person may come to your home. Notice they're not coming with a clipboard, they're coming with a touch device. Well, that same touch device, those same websites, we can access ourselves. We can send text reminders out. Just ask the question, have you been counted? Not necessarily have you filled out the census, let's just say, have you been counted? Have you filled in the necessary information for you, and more importantly, for your household? Have you identified your ethnicity inside of our country? I would add here that the census is not about citizenship. It is about your presence. It is not to say that you're an American citizen, nor that you're applying for citizenship. That is a big myth that we fight in minority communities. I had to fight it in my community as well as in my neighboring Latino communities. So help everyone to understand, we're asking the question, are you in America? Where are you today? Not what your status is, but let us know that you're in America for the obvious reasons that Luke spoke to. All this data makes it possible for us to have a better community. Utilize the social media. Tina said that, and I'm saying it as well. Watch the numbers. I too went there, Tina, this morning to see what our census response rates are. Just see it. And if you can see the number on the upswing, see how close we can get to be at 100. There's nothing better than watching the scales. There is only one message. Everyone must be counted. The 2020 census is important because responses are used to help us determine more than $675 billion in federal funds. Yoshi, if you'd advance to the next one. These funds are for services like emergency response, fire departments, you've heard all this information, clinics and hospitals, all of these things, highways, libraries, all of these things are funded by the census. So with 99% of our areas being hard to reach, 99% hard to reach, but they're located near libraries. Libraries are a tremendous aspect for us. If you just advance a little bit, Yoshi. Yes. I want you to see what the census looks like. It's not just numbers. It's all of us. It's a multicultural America with all the faces. So when you see the 67%, I want you to think about how you get the other 100, because we know these persons and there are their faces. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Charles, for your very, very valuable insights about how the census can be such a big impact in our communities. Just want to, before we go into the Q&A portion, for everyone tuning in, make sure to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions. You can ask questions to me, Charles, and certainly our experts from the Census Bureau with Tina and Luke as well. But before we start the Q&A portion, I'm going to open up a poll just to kind of get a sense of who has been involved and who's taking the census, and kind of go make sure that some of the untruths, are kind of dissolved. So, but I guess Tina and Luke, just a quick question for you all. There, especially I think within the Asian American community, certainly including the Japanese community, there is the notion of, oh, you have to be a citizen to be part of the census. Do you have to be a citizen?
No, pretty much. Charles did touch on this earlier, and no, as long as you're a resident, which is, we don't care about your status at all. We just want to know, where are you living, right? If you're living in the United States, you should be counted. Why? Because there are so many resources that we use that it's impacted by census number. Let's just talk general. Everyone here drive, right? And so if you're using the road, we need that counted. We need that number so that we get funding to improve our roads, especially here in Atlanta. I don't know about you all, but I'm tired of having my wheels realigned every 6 months because of all the potholes that we have in Atlanta, right? And so census numbers do impact that funding for the roads improvement projects. So that's something that we want, everyone to know. And that's just one small aspect of census number. So no, you don't have to be a U.S. citizen to be counted. All you need to do is be a resident of the United States and its territory.
That's right. So I'm going to repeat it over and over again. But yeah, you do not have to be a citizen to be part of the census. And actually, it's important if you're a non-citizen to report it too, because you are here living in America and enjoying all of the different infrastructure and amenities, whether you're a citizen or not, right? So as Tina mentioned, there's federal funding and there's funding more for infrastructure, including roads. So better roads could be, better for your car, less accidents on the road, meaning less traffic, hopefully, right, in Atlanta. So certainly be counted. And then the other notion, I believe, with Japanese communities is that the number of the Japanese population might be a little bit lower compared to the Chinese or Korean, the Filipino, or Indonesian or Vietnamese populations here in Georgia. But the number of Japanese companies in our state is actually number one. There's over 600 Japanese affiliated companies in Georgia, and Japan is the number one foreign investor in our state, as Japanese companies together have invested over $10.5 billion in our state's economy. That's a billion with the B. And those companies employ over 36,000 Georgians. So many of our friends, many of your colleagues, many of your partners, chances are they work for Japanese companies, they work with a Japanese company, or they do business with a Japanese company. So there's a whole lot going on economically between Japan and Georgia. And the more the Japanese community is counted, I think the more of the Japanese business interests are represented within government too, right? So Charles, I know I may ask you a question now, but the more interest, I guess, of Japanese companies and Japanese businesses are represented in government, what could that mean for the future of Japanese investment in our state?
Well, from my perspective, I think it helps us to truly recognize that communities are diverse. We have a presence, obviously the natural one, in terms of restaurants and food sources. So we have some familiarity, but I think that we also need to go to the next level and recognize that there are international partnerships on the business side, the economic side, which turns the dollars in our communities, but it helps us to utilize the American workforce for what is a traditional Japanese product, and then thereby both sides benefit. This is definitely an opportunity to showcase that there is a base. Many of our Japanese companies want to invest where there is an affinity or there already is a Japanese presence, so that if those Japanese persons come, whether the engineers or some of the persons who are setting up the company, and it doesn't mean a 500 size company. We've got companies that are 50 that are Japanese based. When they come over, they have some way to connect. It's about establishing community for me.
Great. Along those lines, Tina, you talked about infrastructure and highways, but how can the census help schools? We had a question actually come in that, how can the census data and kind of help out funding for schools, particularly ESL programs? I guess a lot of people from Japan or any other country that comes into the US, they may not have native fluency in English, but how could having census data, especially about non-native speakers of English, have an impact on education?
That's a great question. And so, one of the things that we know is census data. We have a kind of a snapshot of a community at a time, right? And so, when we have the census number, we can see, oh well, in this, let's say, county, there are this many population, and of that population, these are the children that are going to schools and are in the school age range. And so based on that number, the schools can prep themselves to kind of see, oh, these are how many students we can plan on requesting resource for, hiring teachers for. And so let's say we have the census data of, let's say, 100 students. So the school say, all right, we have 100 students. Let's start hiring teachers to teach these 100 students. Then the new year comes and 150 students show up, right? Because 50 students did not fill out, or the parents did not fill out the census for those 50 students. So they weren't counted. And so now we have a resource of providing only for 100 students, but actually having to stretch it across to cover 150 students. And so by having accurate data, having accurate count of our children for the schools, we're able to actually get better funding for schools to plan better, and then requesting funding for the schools to have more resources, for example. And so when you talk about schools that have overcrowded classrooms, for example, that's kind of impact from census data, where you believe that, oh, well, let's plan for this many students, but then that more students show up. And so we have overcrowded classroom. We have classes taking place in trailers, for example. And one of the things that we want to talk about is the ESL program, right? Well, if the data shows that these children, and this is more of, I think Luke can attest more on this, and it goes into more of the American Community Survey. But the census, 2020 census data allow us to kind of see these are the population that are not, that are of other minority background, of, let's say, more Japanese children, more Vietnamese children, more Hispanic children, for example. And then they can look into the detail and see these are the children that need assistance in ESL support, for example. And that more tie into, I think, the American Community Survey, where it's actually a long form, where it talks more into the income as well as English proficiency of the household and the community. But that's more of a snapshot. But it allowed us to estimate, based on the 2020 census population data. So I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you so much, Tina. And then I guess education is a hot topic, because as soon as we started talking about education, a couple questions came in. But along those lines, so if we are able to get an accurate count, would there be more funding towards possible internship opportunities through high school or through college for students? I guess depending on the data, kind of people thinking about kind of career planning and kind of next step after high school and college, would there be more funding, I guess, for those types of unique programming to prepare students for their careers?
So maybe Charles can attest to this, but I come from a nonprofit background. And so census data is the #1 data that I use to request funding, right? Grant funding for program implementation, whether it was from for a tutoring program, after school program, to breast cancer program, as well as other health program. And so census data is a tool that community can use to see where the needs are, and they can showcase the number of the population that need assistance. And then based on that data, you can create and write grants and request funding for your community to empower your community and improve your community.
So the census data is very important, not only for funding to schools, but nonprofits and charities and associations can use that census data to show the need for certain programs as internship programs or other types of community service programs for funding, right? So Charles, you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
I was, and thank you both Tina and Yoshi, because you hit it on the nail, Tina. In my private sector days, when we were endowing, one of the elements of the application was demographics. And that demographic data came from census data. So then on my public side, when we're applying for grants, and that helps us with these social services. And it's not just the educational elements, but the NGOs, the nonprofits, everyone starts the application by saying how many people in this locality potentially can be enhanced or benefited by the service. And those rubrics in the evaluation element start to show whether in my particular case, the federal dollars, whether it be Title IID for technology, Title III, ESOL, we can just go down the gamut with the federal programs that are out there. And some of them are culturally based. Some of them do have the benefit to support interns or collaborative elements of international exchange. So just know that this data provides the justification and the support for the applications.
Great, thank you, Charles. And Tina, I have a question for you from the audience. How can a census influence the various aspects of creative industry in general? So I think our question is kind of referring to maybe the film industry, graphic design industry, kind of the creative industry. Can the census data help out those people working in or who wants to work in the creative industry?
Luke, do you want to take this question, or do you want me to take this question?
Luke, are you with us? Okay, go ahead.
This is Luke. To directly answer that question, I think when it comes to industry characteristics, we would rely more on the data from the American Community Survey to make some kind of decision or investment decisions. And for this webinar, we focus more about the 2020 census, which is very much the count of population and some basic demographics. Now, that's why I mentioned American Community Survey earlier. That's the communities be aware of it, participate, and that kind of data are being used. And then Yoshi, you and I serve on Kennesaw Asian Studies program. We know that the university is using this data in programming, right? Even in encouraging these American students to go into Asian studies, Japan business trip, and things like that. It's based on the data that we collect.
Great, thank you very much. So it's not only the census, but so we certainly encourage everyone on this call to be part of the American Community Survey too, as that goes a little bit more in detail in getting out information, what types of services, what types of things are able to be funded in the future. So, and Luke, I have another question for you. This is a very interesting question. So is there census data available distinguishing between Issei, Nisei, Sansei population? So that means first generation, second generation, third generation. So I think this is not only for Japanese populations, which certainly could be part of it, but for, I guess, for different ethnicities, is there a way for the census to get data on different generations?
To answer that question formally, any questions asked on the census form is being reviewed and approved by Congress. And there's a need to know to ask the questions. And these questions are tied to legislation. So no, the answer would be no, we did not ask, and we never asked whether the first generation, second generation, or third generation Japanese on the census form, as I showed as an examples in one of the slides earlier. But if you allow me to insert two more points about the citizenship question, and it is regarding to the international Japanese community here in Georgia. The Census Bureau counts everybody who lives most of the time in the United States, including international students, even though during the midst of the COVID pandemic and they are returning home for some reasons, they are still counted on the campus. That's remember. So that's important that we have to get the word out to let them know that they are still counted, because the count is important for the local municipality as also the university. Now, in terms of the economic social characteristics that we collected on the American Community Survey, as Jarvis said, that creates a what we call the advantage edge or competitive advantage edge for Georgia, for example. And I see this from real-time experience, working with the Gwinnett Chamber of Commerce or the Atlanta Chamber, and companies or international communities coming here and looking for even the number of Japanese here, how many Japanese companies here, what they would feel at home being here. Look at they know that the Japanese population is highly educated. That's how they then recruit Japanese workers to work for these companies. So it's important that we participate in these census, and it's important we produce the accurate data so you can have business to make better decisions.
Great, thank you very much, Luke. And then we did have another kind of final question come in. What university did we just talk about? So Luke was just talking about Kennesaw State University, KSU. We are actually both serving on the advisory committee of the Asian Studies program, and also SALPO, the Symposium of Asia America Partnership Opportunities with Dr. Mei Gao. So a quick plug in for their program, but so the census data and then also the data from the American community surveys goes a long way in kind of determining what types of programs are available at universities as well. So, so we certainly encourage you to participate in both. And then one final kind of myth, I guess, within the Japanese community, I think, is a lot of the Japanese companies here in Georgia and throughout the U.S., they employ expats or their staff and employees from Japan within their facilities here in America. And a lot of those expats may have the notion of, oh, it's not important for me to take part in the census because in 2 or 3 years, we're going to go back to Japan and I won't be here in the US. So Tina, can you kind of elaborate just one more time why it's so important for even expats who are only here in the US for maybe just a few years at a time and then may not be in the US in 2030, why is it so important for them to take part and be counted in the census?
Yes, that's a great point. And I know that actually is a great question, and many have asked that question before too. And one of the things that we want to make sure everyone knows is this: even though you're there, let's say for a few years, but you're still using those resources for those 2 to 3 years, right? And so we don't know, let's say, even just let's focus on healthcare, right? So since with COVID-19, let's talk about healthcare. We need that number, that population, that data, so that the community that you're living in can plan for hospitals, for doctors, for hiring nurses, the healthcare needs for that community. So let's say that you don't fill out the census, and let's say that there's 10,000 people living in that community, and 30% of the population decide that, oh, you know what, this is not important. We don't need this. We don't need to fill it out. So when that information come back and the hospital administrators, the community planning for healthcare services, look at the population data and say, oh, we only have 7,000 population here. Let's hire, let's say, 20 doctors to see this population. Let's plan for emergency care for 7,000 people. But you forget that 3,000 people that were not counted, it's not going to disappear, right? They're still living there, using the resources, the healthcare resources that's in that community. And so we want to make sure that the community is prepared, have enough resources, and the data count is very important in determining and driving business decision, as well as local planning, right? And so even when you're an expat staying there for 2 to 3 years, that does not mean, well, hopefully you will never need to use any medical emergency care, any resources, but, you know, God forbid anything happen, right? Then at least that is there for you to, you know, go and get the care that you need. That's just an example. But, you know, but census data isn't just at that level. It's for every small thing from, like I said, school planning to infrastructure of roads, building, even planning for businesses, for example. So by you not being counted, right, and not being counted for that year, you're impacting that community as well as yourself, really, your own benefit for 2 to 3 years. And then, of course, then when you leave, you're impacting that community for, you know, the next 10 years also too. So that's why it's really important, even though you're only there for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, you should be counted so that that community have the data and the funding that they need, as well as, you know, the number to plan their services accurately.
Great, thank you so much, Tina. Go ahead, Charles.
Can I tag on to that? I think people need to accept it and dispel the myth. The census is not a projection. It is a count. So what happens in 2 or 3 years? Where are you today? That's what I think we need to say to everyone.
Great, thank you very much. And even for expats, if you go back to Japan or any other country, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you know, chances are you will have another person come in to take your spot too. So, but it is 2:30 now. So without further ado, we do need to kind of close the program. But we will have a recording of this webinar available to everyone in English, but then we will also create a Japanese version as well for everyone who may be more comfortable in kind of learning about the census in Japanese. But at this time, I would like to ask the chair of the Japan America Society of Georgia, from all the way from Rome, Floyd County, I believe, but from Hodge Consulting Services, Mr. Al Hodge.
And I have filled out my census information. We did it as soon as we received it. And that's a segue into thanking Luke and Tina for your expertise that you provided today. We greatly appreciate that. And of course, Japan American Society of Georgia is a partner in order to help get the word out and to get those census numbers up. Of course, Charles Coney, our chair for public affairs for Japan American Society of Georgia, and our board also greatly appreciate the public policy aspect of all of this. I'm happy that you covered transportation, healthcare, economic development, infrastructure, and education. The education system certainly depends upon accurate counts. Yoshi, I'm happy that you pointed out that even for the person that's here 3 years, someone, we hope and intend, will take their place. Therefore, having an accurate count is certainly essential to making certain that we have the right services. And I will add that the private sector also takes a look at census information for everything from workforce availability to the funding that's available, discretionary income, so many other aspects are included in the census. So I'm happy that Japan American Society of Georgia is a partner with our friends at the Census Bureau. On behalf of the Japan American Society of Georgia Board of Directors and our professional staff led by Yoshi Domoto, we thank you for your participation today, and we invite you to check out and participate in future webinars. You can do that by going to Japan American Society of Georgia and seeing some of the everything from fun cooking classes to cultural, entertainment, all kinds of other programming, and substantive programs like this that cover economic development, business decisions, public policy, and more. We thank you all. We've been going 40 years with the Japan American Society of Georgia this year, and we look to having many more. So thank you, Yoshi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Al. Thank you to our panelists today, to Mr. Luke, to Tina and Charles. We really appreciate your expertise and your insights, but looks like within our polls, looks like 80% of our audience has participated in the census already. So we have to get the other 20% up and then work on promoting the census through our communities as well. So as Mr. Hodge mentioned, we do have some events coming up virtually. Tomorrow, we actually have a fun event for the whole family, a Zoo Atlanta Trivia Challenge. And then we actually our outreach coordinator, Ms. Mariko Shimoda, will be actually teaching you some Japanese phrases and Japanese animals. And then we'll learn about how Zoo Atlanta is reopening up in midst of the current pandemic and keeping all of us safe as you visit their facilities. And then also coming up Saturday, we have a language exchange program where you can speak English and Japanese and network. And then on Sunday, with our partner restaurant, Nakato Japanese Restaurant, we'll be doing a cooking demo and class where you will be learning how to make temari sushi and then also chawanmushi. So some unique Japanese dishes that you can learn how to cook from home and then certainly taste from home too. So, but thank you very much to everyone for all your continued support. We look forward to seeing you again at our next program. Visit our website at www.jasgeorgia.org for more information, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
All right.